What's happening, Boot Junkies? Mike Dog Audio here, back with another video on home studio setup for voiceover, and I'm doing it, and I'm not even apologizing for it. I'm not even going to apologize for it. I'm going to review the entry-level interface from Audient, the new entry-level Audient interface called the ID4, and I'm going to do it with a Shure SM7B. So if you know what I'm talking about, you know, like, that's crazy, because that's not going to, you would think that that's not going to make this device shine, but it's going to make this device shine. You might want to buy it. I'm not gonna influence you in that way. I'm just gonna show you that these. I'm gonna review this device and let you decide if this is the right one for you. What are we talking about today, Mike? We have in the booth with us today a pre-production, an early production model of the Audient ID4 interface. And if you're seeing this, that means it's out, and the folks at Audient sent it to me. So, a couple of disclaimers right off the bat. In the beginning, when you watch it, it will say includes paid promotion. I put that there because Audient sent me the device. They're letting me keep it. So yeah, consider that payment, I guess, but I'm not sponsored by them. They don't give me any money. I'm not being paid to do this. They just send me the device and ask me to review it, which I'm happy to do. They also don't get any editorial control. They sent me the user manual, they sent me the device, and they said, off you go. They'll see this at the same time you see it. When it comes out, the Audient folks, if they're subscribers, they'll be able to see it. I don't even tell them when it comes out because it's none of their business. It's my opinions, and you'll get to hear it. If there's warts, you'll get to see them. We're just going to go through and we're going to talk about the device. I'm going to walk you through the device. I'm going to talk about the use cases for it, when you might want to use it, and we'll just go through sort of all the whys and wherefores of this particular device. This device, if we look at it, let's go. Oh, did I do the whole thing with the wrong camera on? Let's do it again. What a Dumbo. What's happening, Boot Junkies? Mike Dog Audio here, back with another video on home studio setup for voiceover. And I'm doing it today, and I'm not even going to apologize for it. What am I doing? I'm going to review an entry-level audio interface, and I'm going to review it with a Shure SM7B, and I'm not even going to apologize for it. If you know anything about microphones, you know that this microphone is a super big challenge for entry-level audio interfaces. And if that entry-level audio interface can power this mic with no assistance, then you know you got some. You know you're onto something. And I think we're onto something here. What do we have in the booth? What we're going to talk about in this video is the Audient ID4 interface. What's an interface, Mike? I'm here. I've never bought an interface before, but I bought this microphone and they said I need this thing before I can connect it to the computer. Well, that's true. And what the thing is, if it's not a USB-based microphone, if it's got an XLR jack in it, as this microphone does, then you'll need something called an interface. An interface takes the signal from the microphone, which is just the slightest little bit of signal. Microphones really don't create much signal. If you can believe it, the motion of my voice oscillating the air in front of the diaphragm in the microphone creates the slightest little whisper of electricity. And that little whisper of electricity goes down through the cable, down into the interface, which preamplifies it, raises that up so that it becomes a usable signal that the computer can understand. That's the purpose of the preamplifier, to take those little tiny signals and boost them up, which is what this one does. Some microphones require additional electricity in order to do that. We'll talk about that in just a second. This microphone does not. It creates its own electricity, if you can believe that. It does, and so it's connected in, and we have the Audient ID4. So what we're going to do is we're going to just go through all the buttons and knobs. I'll show you all the stuff that it does. I'll talk to you about when you might be in the market for this device. Who is this designed for, based on my opinions. And I'll let you know. We'll just go over the impressions of it. I'm not going to make a buy or pass recommendation. You're going to hear this. You're going to see what it does, and you're going to decide if this is the right thing for you. Okay, so let's go and take a look at the device itself. So right now, we've got it here. This is the Audient ID4. This is a preamplifier and an interface. It can handle one microphone, only one at a time. There's a separate port on the front that allows you to plug in an instrument called a direct injection. So if you have an electric guitar, something like that, a keyboard, you can plug it in right here, and that will bypass the microphone preamplifier. So it's going to have a louder signal that goes in that bypasses the microphone preamp. You can insert that. So technically, there are two inputs, but only one of them is a microphone input. Does that make sense? I hope so. Okay. The first knob here is labeled gain. If you can see that, it's labeled gain, and that determines how loud the microphone is. And as you turn that knob down, the signal gets quieter, and as you turn it up, the signal gets louder. Now, this microphone, I mentioned in the beginning, this microphone is really challenging for a preamplifier to handle, because I don't know if you noticed that knob. If you look down at that knob is turned all the way up. It's up on 10. And that's because this microphone is a real challenge for an entry-level preamp. You have to turn it all the way up. This microphone really wants 65, 70 decibels of gain supplied by the preamplifier. But this preamplifier only supplies 58, which is why it's a little bit unfair for me to use this. But typically on your entry-level devices, you have to turn that device all the way up, that preamplifier all the way up. And that's sort of the kiss of death with entry-level preamplifiers, because when you turn it all the way up, that last little bit between 9 and 10 there, that's where all the hiss comes in. There's often an underlying hiss that gets introduced, a shh, that just is everywhere, and you can't get rid of it. It's in between the words, it's under your words. It just sounds like you're recording near a distant waterfall, which is no good. You really don't want to, for most of your entry-level preamplifiers, you don't want to turn it all the way up. You want to be at like the 8 o'clock or the 7 o'clock or, like the 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock position on the knob. You don't want to be all the way up because of that noise. But what I've learned from my long experience with Audient preamplifiers, and why I took the risk in actually connecting this microphone to this preamplifier, is I know that the design of these preamplifiers is such that when you have to turn it all the way up, no new noise gets introduced. There is no new additional noise. You can do that with these preamplifiers. They're super clean and they're really transparent, and they sound great. So yeah, you can absolutely use a Shure SM7B with the ID4. Now, this is probably not the microphone that you're typically going to use. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to switch it to a more likely microphone choice that you might use with this device. So bear with me 1 second and we'll just go through the rest, because I want you to hear both microphones. So bear with me 1 second. I'll be right back. Okay, so I've switched now to a large diaphragm condenser microphone, which is a much more logical choice that you would typically use for this interface, especially if you're looking to do voice acting, if you're looking to become a podcaster. You might be choosing a large diaphragm condenser. So I wanted to make sure that I gave you the chance to hear how one works, because that SM7B was there to prove a point, but it's probably not the choice that you're actually going to make most of the time. Okay, if we switch back to looking at the Audient here, you notice that I turned the gain way down. It's now at like the 2 o'clock-ish position, because these microphones don't require nearly as much gain. But what they do require is electricity in order to work. So if you look here on the device, it will say 48V. This is called phantom power. And this is something that I see a lot when people are looking at microphones if they're not experienced with these interfaces. The first thing they want to do is they'll buy a cable, and it'll be a USB on an XLR jack, which is the kind that plugs into this microphone, an XLR jack, and it will just be a USB on the other, or it will be like a headphone jack on the other, and they'll try and stick it into their computer and they'll say, it doesn't work. And that's because these microphones do require electricity, and the Audient can supply it 48 volts. There's a little push button on the back here that you push it, and it will supply that power, and the little light will indicate that power is applied. So you know if it's turned on, it will help you troubleshoot it, so that you know. Make sense? Make sense? Hopefully that makes sense, so you'll be able to, when you go in any interface, if you have a large diaphragm condenser, this sort of the side address kind of microphone, know that you need to supply that phantom power, and this one can do it. Okay. There is a separate knob down here for the direct in, so the guitar jack or whatever that you've plugged in here, there's a separate gain for that, which will not affect the microphone preamp. So if you do want to work with a guitar or keyboard or something like that, you can adjust how loud that is in comparison to your microphone. Okay. In the middle, but really for voice actors, you probably won't use that DI in, I wouldn't imagine. But if you do, if you're a singer-songwriter type and you've got a guitar or a keyboard and you want to play along and record everything, you can DI it right in there. In the center is another knob that is labeled as the monitor mix. And what this does is this allows you to adjust how much of the microphone you hear versus how much of the computer you hear that's coming in over the USB device, over the USB cable. So you can switch it to say, I want to hear only stuff that's coming from the computer, or I want stuff that's only coming into my microphone. I can adjust anywhere in between and mix how much of each. When is that useful? Let's imagine that you're singing along to some pre-recorded music. You might want to have that music loud in your headphones and not have your voice all that loud so you can hear the music. You might want to adjust that you can hear both at the same time. You might want to just hear the music just as a reference, but you want to be able to hear your voice nice and loud. You can actually adjust. As a voice actor, we do something called a pickup, where you're fixing a bit of audio in the middle of a sentence or a sentence in the middle of a paragraph, and you need to be able to hear what's on the computer, and you need to hear your microphone so you can mix in between. That's what that knob is for. On the right-hand side, you have this large knob that's looks like a volume knob, but it's called the digital encoder, or the radial rotary encoder. It's just a big knob that allows you to do a couple of different functions depending on which of these two lights are activated on the device. You see right now that I have both of them selected. Let's talk about the right one first. The right one is this thing called ID, and that's an additional feature that Audient supplies where you can actually assign that button to do something on that knob on the computer. With the ID4, it pretty much allows you to have a second center mouse wheel. It's kind of the best way that I can explain it, but it's called scroll control. And what that does is if you have the ID button illuminated, when you turn that knob, depending on what's happening on your computer, you might be zooming in or zooming out, you might be scrolling back and forth, you might be adjusting a parameter on a synthesizer, whatever you're hovered over, if it's sensitive to the center wheel on your mouse, you can use the scroll control for it. So you can use it for creative options and so forth, but that's really what that's there for. In other devices, that might be a reprogrammable button. On the ID4, that's pretty much it. It's just the scroll control, and it will allow it to be like a center mouse wheel. So next to it, you also have this button here that is the speaker button. That speaker button allows you to adjust it's sort of like a speaker mute button. So while that's illuminated, you're getting signal out, but if you press, you couldn't hear me, but it mutes the output, what's going out over the monitor cables. So these would be going out to your speaker monitors, or they're going out, in my case, to another recording device. This is how I'm sending the signal out. But when I let that button go, it mutes that output so that you can't hear anything. Up at the top here, there is a button that's labeled USB, and the light that's illuminated. That just means that there is a USB connection between the device and the computer. Just shows that it's sort of like the power button, the power indicator that there's power being received by the device. So if you're not getting any signal out of it, nothing's lighting up, it's probably because it's not connected. Now, that brings us to this port on the back here. This is a USB powered device. It's plugged in over USB-C or USB 3.0. So it's USB-C on the back of this device, but you can connect it directly over to with a USB-C to USB-C over to your laptop, your computer, and it will work just fine. Or you can do it over to like a USB 3.0. There is one thing to be aware of with the USB 3.0, and that is that can't quite deliver as much power as a USB-C device. And so that when they're allocating power to the device, if you're on a USB 3.0, know that it will pull a little power away from the headphone amplifier, so your headphones won't go quite as loud. They'll still be plenty loud, but they won't go quite as loud as with the USB-C device, just because USB-C can supply more power. But otherwise, this is attached to the power on the computer. The computer's off, the device is off. The computer's on, the device is on. There's no separate power switch or anything like that. It's common across the entire ID line. And that's really this whole device. That's the whole device in a nutshell. It's a really capable little device, but I think for the working voice actor, this is more of an entry-level device. I know that there are some voice actors out there that use the ID4 because the preamps are amazing, and it's a very inexpensive device in the world of high-quality preamplifiers. But for me, it falls a little tiny bit short for the working voice actor. If you're a hobbyist, you just need to record. You just want to, stream. You just want to record some voiceover for your YouTube channel. You're maybe doing some e-learning stuff for work because you're not doing training out in the field right now. Then the ID4 is going to work great. It just lacks a little bit of the expansion that the rest of the ID line has. Additional preamps, expandable output, individually addressable headphone mixes. The ID4, in order to make the price point and not sacrifice the preamp, it cuts some other corners. And those are some of the corners that they cut. Not a bad device. It's the same mic preamp in the ID4, in the ID14, and I believe up the rest of the line. There might be some slight differences in the amount of gain they supply, but really, they're super clean, super transparent preamps. So if that's your number one criteria, the ID4 is the way to go. If you need some of the expansion and additional features, you might consider other ones. That's just my take on it. Now, all of this is backed by the driver software that's called the ID software that Audient provides with the device. It's not strictly necessary to install the driver software. These will just work as USB sound cards, but the real functionality, these are somewhat customizable depending on which ID unit you buy. They are customizable with the ID software. So I'm going to turn on the ID software and turn on my screen recorder here. I have a laptop right here. So we'll be able to see sort of the little bit of functionality that you can add to the ID4. So now I've got the ID software open on the screen. And sorry, you're going to hear some fan noise because when I do recording on this laptop, the fans come on and it comes into the microphone. That's not being introduced by the device or the microphone. That's the laptop that I have here. That's going to turn into it's going to take off if we're not careful. But I want to show you the ID software. For the ID4, there's not a ton of functionality, not a ton of customization that you can do. Probably the most important thing is the loop back feature. So if you're going to use this device as like something for Skype calls or something like that, for Discord chats or something like that, you can actually determine which signal gets sent back down the line to the person on the other end. So if their voice is coming in, you don't want to send their voice back down the line to them. You can actually take their voice out, called a mix minus. You can take that out and not send it back to them so there's no echo. It allows you to still use your nice high quality microphone for your Zoom, your Discord, whatever it is, your Skype. But any other signal, you don't want to loop it back and send it back down the line. You can determine that here with the loop back mixer. That allows you to determine sort of what gets sent back down the line. And that's really the primary function that you can do here. The other thing that the ID software does is if there is a firmware update, you can check for updates. So there's always a possibility that Audient will send new functionality. They'll make some fixes. You can update your firmware right from the computer and update that device. So like I said, I right now have the pre-production version. There may be additional functions that come into play with the ID software. I don't know, but it's a possibility. And the firmware update, it's just a one-click operation. It will tell you that there's a firmware update. It's a couple of clicks. It'll say, go do it. You'll download it. It will automatically download. It'll automatically install it. It'll reboot the device and you'll be good to go. It takes about 90 seconds. Okay, I'm going to stop recording down here so we can get rid of that fan noise. And so there you have it. That is the ID4 Mark II in a nutshell. Sorry, the fans are still going, but we're just going to proceed forward. It's a great little device. It's a good entry-level device. I would definitely say my impressions are that it's a good entry-level device. It's not made for the serious voiceover, this is my career kind of thing. But if you're looking to get started, you're on a budget, but you want to have the best possible sound, You will absolutely get incredible sound out of this preamp. You're just going to sacrifice a little bit on features. But really, it's going to be worlds a lot better than something like a USB microphone. So definitely something to think about. Definitely something to think about. The excellent preamps, I think, are the big selling feature of the ID4. And if you're a hobbyist looking to get into voiceover, looking to start your first podcast, looking to do a little streaming, this could be just the device for you. So I hope that helps. As you see, you've seen it work. You've seen it work with the dynamic microphone, with the condenser microphone. You've seen all the functions. You've seen the software. So hopefully that's a good overview of what this little device can do. So I hope that helps. Now, get yourself an interface and a microphone so that you can get in a booth and you can record something amazing. Thanks. We'll talk to you next time.